In this video, we are going to cover how we can use barrel files in a React application. A barrel file can help us to consolidate multiple exports from files and directories and simplify how we import them for use in other files. So let's get started. What we want to take a look at first is our directory structure and our imports. So you can see here we have multiple directories, each containing their own component and the related file. We also have our constants directory up here, and I've set both of these up to handle constants in different ways. So in items.js, we have an object with constants defined inside of it by a key value pair. And then in vendors.js, we have each constant exported individually. On the app.js component, I have these imports up here. We have place order form, receive order form, and audit form, and they're each being imported directly from the file that contains them, and these don't have curly braces. Then down here, I have some constants imported from the vendors file using the curly brace syntax, and then I have the items constants imported using no curly braces. If we look at audit form as an example, so let's go ahead and open this up. We have this set up as a default export. So up here you can see it says export default function. So anywhere that we use a default export, we do not need to use the curly braces when we import. So now let's look at a different file in our constants directory. If we go to vendors.js, we are exporting each of these constants individually, and we're not using default exports in this case. Instead, we have what are called named exports. We can set up the audit form component like this too, if we remove the word default. So let's go back to audit form. Let's delete default. So now we just have export function. I'm going to save, and then you can see on the right hand side here that my page breaks because I changed the export type by removing the word default. So we can fix that. If we go to the app component, now because we're not using the default export here, we wrap this in curly braces and save. It fixes our page here on the right, and we're using the named import here. I'm not going to cover the details of each of these import types in this video. Just keep in mind the following points. So default exports do not need the curly braces. Named exports do use the curly braces. And you can only have one default export per file. You can have multiple named exports in a file though. With all that in mind, let's get into making our barrel files. So let's go ahead and revert this back. So we're going to pull this back to using the default import here. And then on the audit form, we're going to use the default export. So we're going to start in the forms directory under inventory. And then under inventory, we do have two nested directories, audit and util. And we know that audit is using the default import on app component, and then calculate monthly item count. This is also using the default export here, and that's being used on audit form using the default import. What we want to do first is make an index.js file in the audit directory. So let's go here, make a new file, index.js. And here we're going to essentially re-export our component. So we can do this one of two ways. Let me demonstrate the first way. So let's import our component, audit form, and then from the component file, which is audit form. And so we're importing it, and now we're going to re-export it as a named export. So we'll do export audit form. So what we're doing here is we're really just importing the component and then exporting it using the named export syntax. So we can demonstrate that if we go into app.js. Let's look at audit form. So now that we have the index.js file associated with it, we no longer need to use the direct path to the component file now. So let me show. If I do curly braces here, we can see on the side it breaks, but if I delete that path and just make it directly to the audit directory rather than the component file itself, we're now getting that import from this index.js file. The other approach that I can use here, so I'm going to comment this out for right now. Since audit form is a default export, there's a syntax that we can use. Export default as, and we'll just name it audit form. And we're going to do the same thing here. So we're exporting the default export from the audit form file, and this sets it up as a named export. So I'm going to save this, and I can demonstrate that that still works. And if we try to go directly to the audit file, or the audit form file, it breaks. So our named export is still working properly. We can do the same thing for our calculate monthly item count file here. So let's go ahead and make a new index.js file for our util directory. If we go here, make sure it's a default export. You can do export default as, and I'm going to use that same function name. And then if we head on over to the audit form component, we wrap the curly braces around to use the named import that we just created. If I save it, it breaks because we're still importing directly from the function file itself. But if I delete this and use the util directory, we're now picking up the export that we just created here in our index.js file. Now we're going to make another index.js file at the top of the inventory directory. So let's go ahead and make that. In this file, we can choose what we want to export from the inventory directory as a whole. So in the index.js file of the inventory directory, we can use this syntax here. So I'm going to use export star from our audit directory. Now what that is doing is it's going to take every single import that we have specified here, or every single export that we've specified here, and it's going to export them from the inventory directory. So we're kind of working our way up the directory structure here. So we're exporting from audit. Now we're exporting the audit directory from the inventory directory. If we had multiple components in the audit directory but didn't specify them in the index.js of the audit directory, this export here would not contain those components. Let me go ahead and show you what I mean with that. So if we head over to the app.js, we're still importing audit form from the audit directory. Since we have our index.js file for the inventory directory now, let me go ahead and close these. Since we have this exporting from here now, let's head over to the app component. I can remove audit from the path and save, and this will still work. That's because of this file here and us exporting the audit form from here as well. So now if I let me make a new component, and I'm just going to name it audit form container, and we're just going to return the audit form just for demonstration purposes. So audit form container, we're going to use the default import here for audit form. We're just going to return the audit form component. And then we'll export it. Okay, so I saved that. So if I head over to our index file of the audit directory, let's delete this. So we're exporting the audit form. Let's update this right now to the audit form container. So now our page breaks because we're no longer exporting the audit form component. And now our index file of the inventory directory is only picking up the audit form container. So if we head over to the app component, if we change this to audit form container and then update this here and we save, you can see that we fixed our page here on the right hand side. Now if I want to export both of them from that file, I can do that. So let's export the audit form component. And now this index file from the inventory directory is exporting all of those. Now we're going to head over to the app component, and if I do audit form, we can use this component. Now you can see on the right hand side that I have two audit form components. Now in some cases that might be the behavior that you want, but in this particular example, the audit form component doesn't need to be accessible on the app component because we're only using it in the audit form container. So there's really no need to have it being accessible on the app component. So we can fix that. So say we still want to export this audit form from the audit directory so that it's accessible for maybe other components in the inventory directory, but we don't want to export it from the inventory directory. So let's go here. I'm going to close this to make it a little easier to read. So we're on the index file of the inventory directory. So let's get rid of this syntax here. The export star exports everything from the audit directory. Now, if we want to pick what we want to export, say we only want to export the audit form container in this instance, we have to import it first. So let's do audit form container, and we'll go audit. And we're going to import it directly from the audit form container component. And now we can export that. So we're still, our page is still broken on the right hand side here, but we have to go back to our app component. So audit form is no longer accessible. because we updated our import. And we want to delete this, save, and now our page works again because we removed the audit form component because it's no longer accessible from that directory. Now I'm going to go ahead and build these barrel files for every directory. I do want to call out something about our constants file here. So in items, we have a default export for inventory item list. In vendors, we have named exports. So these are going to be different in our barrel files. So let's go ahead and make that. Now, if we want to export inventory item list, we're going to do export default as inventory item list from items. And this syntax here is going to get this into it's going to change it into a named export from this point. For vendors, this is already set up as named exports. So we can just export all of them because we want to be able to access all of them from our constants directory from the vendors file. Now that we've created all of those barrel files, we're going to make one final barrel file in our forms directory. And we are going to export everything from the inventory directory and the orders directory. Now with that, we can head over to our app component again, and we can update all of our imports. So we have our index file at our forms directory. We no longer have to access these individually. We can just take that back to forms, and we can take these imports here, since they're accessible through forms now, we can combine those imports and remove the old ones. And our page still works. For constants, we can do the same thing. We have our barrel file here in the constants directory. We no longer have to access these individually. Inventory item list is now accessible as a named import. We can remove this and remove vendors from there and access all of our constants from the constants directory. Before we end the video, I do want to say, just like anything else in programming, this is just another tool to use. It may not be the best pattern to follow for the specific project you are working on, so keep that in mind while you are building. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.